Hey guys, OGalbina here, and recently I dropped a video on what I think the best Pokemon of each typing were in the Draft League format. The support for that video was great. By the way, go watch it if you haven't done so already. And since you guys crushed the like goal of 20, I'm here with the list of the most overrated Pokemon of each type. This list will kind of be a conglomerate of Galardex draft and Natdex draft. The main criteria I personally used was if a Pokemon was drafted consistently in a format or overhyped when it comes to discussing their viability. I didn't really take into account their prices on the draft board, so keep that in mind. Also keep in mind this is subjective. I have some pretty juiced takes and I know a ton of you guys won't agree with them. But I implore y'all to at least hear me out. No hard feelings if I say your favorite Pokemon sucks. If you guys enjoyed today's video, be sure to drop a like, and if you guys hit a like goal of 25 likes, we will do a video on the most underrated Pokemon of each typing in the Draft League format. If you are new to the channel, be sure to sub as well. We're on our way to 1,000 and we're pretty darn close, so I'd really appreciate it if you help me out. Also, of course, drop your list in the comments and tell me how dumb I am for putting your favorite mon on the list. Alright, let's do it. Bug was pretty tough, as a majority of the bugs commonly drafted in the format are pretty solid in my eyes. Mons like Scizor, Volcarona, Scolipede, and Buzzwole are all very solid and fulfill their roles well. So instead, I look to the sticky web setters, as I feel Web's HO builds are inherently worse this generation, but still spammed in the Galardex Wi-Fi scene. I settled on Ribombee here, because not only are Webs much worse this gen, Ribombee doesn't offer much anywhere else. Defensively, it is incredibly lackluster, which is especially bad when it may double up as the fairy type on your team. Pour one out for the people who play Urshifu with Ribombee as their fairy. Offensively, it really struggles this gen as well. Any competent steel can wall it to the ends of the earth with the removal of hidden power, and while Quiver Dance is an alluring prospect, have fun positioning yourself into a sweep with that bulk. In my mind, the only redeeming factor of Barry B. Benson right here is that it has a great speed stat. Otherwise, if you're set on getting webs, you may as well look for Galvantula for his offensive prowess, or Araquanid or Vikavolt for a little more bulk. Our Dark type is going to be the beginning of a trend on my list here. Passive Pokemon. I hate Pokemon that can be exploited due to their passivity and lack of damage output, and liability to be taunted. Umbreon is one of the first Pokemon I think of when I think of passivity. Sure, it has phenomenal bulk and can be pretty tough to break if you just throw attacks at it, but it can be very well exploited by taunt and free switches to strong offensive fightings. Umbreon can try and catch them with Toxics, but considering most of these fighting types might have guts, not always the best idea. It can also be taken advantage on Telegraph Protect turns after it throws up a Wish, allowing either setup, a substitute, or an offensive switch to grab momentum. Passive equals bad. Be ready to hear me screech that for the remainder of this video. Dragon was decently tough, as I like a lot of the dragon types in the format. The Pokemon I settled on was actually a Pokemon I think has merit, and I've drafted it a few times. Heck, I just drafted it a few weeks ago in a Showdown League, and I'll probably do it again soon. The most overrated dragon is Latias. Latias sits in a weird middle gray area for me. I feel as if it's always just a bit too weak to grab Okos and 2-hit KOs that it should. It also seems to just not have enough bulk to avoid 2-hit KOs you want. Calm Mind sets are great, and it's a phenomenal Scarfer with access to Healing Wish and Trick. It just falls flat in too many calcs for my liking. Oh baby, it's time! Regieleki Slander. The definition of a Trapmon. I can never get the justification of drafting this overrated bundle of jumper cables. Transistor gives it the potential for so much crazy damage. If only one of the most prevalent typings in Draft League didn't wall you to the ends of the earth. Regieleki's way of hitting most grounds is literally just booming. Yeah, it'll chunk down the ground, but for what? It did its job in checking the electric. It really is a bummer, because this thing is just one coverage move away from being an absolute monster. Heck, even just access to Toxic would make this thing very solid. But if your only way of pushing past your checks is literally blowing up and removing yourself from the game, we got a problem. Eleki can function as a solid screen setter with its great speed and boom, but there are a ton of other mons that can fulfill that screen roll setter and do so much more. I don't care what anybody says, this mon blows. Do not draft it. I had such high hopes for Galarian Weezing going into Gen 8. Solid defensive typing and the access to 3 great abilities in Neutralizing Gas, Levitate, and Misty Surge. It also has great physical bulk, which is rare for fairies. Unfortunately, it just doesn't function well enough as the defensive wall that you want it to. I think its big crux is that it lacks solid, reliable recovery, especially when it's forced in so consistently and will likely get knocked off and lose its Black Sludge, and hazards are usually present. So this thing just isn't sticking around for long. Plus, offensively it's pretty passive, and especially defensively, it's not the bulkiest, so special dragons are doing a ton. It had so much potential, but I feel like it just kind of falls flat on its face. Hawlucha unfortunately takes our spot for fighting. It has raw game-ending potential with a combination of Unburden plus a Sword Dance or a Bulk Up. The only issue I have with Lucha is if you have Coco Lucha or Rillo Lucha game plan, it feels like you're almost playing 5v6 the whole game, and you can't really use Halucha until you've met the conditions you've set to sweep. Even then, it's often a struggle to get X Bulkiamon into range of a +2 acrobatics or close combat. It has other uses with Mold Breaker, and it can be a solid Scarfer, but other fighting types are typically better suited for these roles. Lucha is decent, but I feel as if playing 5v6 versus good competition usually isn't a great idea. Fire was a lot like Bug for me, in the sense that I enjoy most of the commonly drafted fire types. I ended up settling with Arcanine here, and disclaimer, I do not think it's bad. Just not as good as people hype it up to be. Offensive Arcanine is pretty sick, I won't lie, but it's typically drafted for a more defensive purpose where I feel it falls flat. When your damage output usually hurts you via recoil and Flare Blitz and Wild Charge, as well as the fact that you're forced to run boots and avoid knockoffs like the Plague to avoid Rock's Chip, I feel as if Arcanine is just a bit too hard pressed to consistently fill its role. Now don't get it twisted, I think Corviknight is a very solid Pokemon in Draft League. It's just a bit too expensive for my taste, considering its main job is just to be a U-turn bot. It pivots phenomenally and has a great defensive typing that allows it to wall a majority of the metagame. It just really lacks the ability to push progress on its own, and in a lot of games you're almost forced to spam U-turn as to not give up offensive momentum to your opponent. That can be valuable in its own right, but for a high price point that it usually is on draft boards, it just isn't worth it for me personally, considering there are other mons that can fulfill that role. I will admit, Spectre has a very high skill ceiling and can absolutely massacre teams with some pretty neat sets. Not to mention that if you don't have a good ghost immunity, it can push past you and bully your build. I do think it's a bit overrated though. Teams with a solid ghost immunity and resist usually deal with this thing more than easy enough, especially if you're aware of the tricks Spectre can pull off, like Taunt, Disable, and other things of the sort. I personally prefer ghosts that can push past their own checks and push their own progress, like Gengar. Or Tapu Bulu. No Grassy Glide, no physical Fairy Stab, no viability. It's really tough justifying the drafting Bulu as your fairy when it loses to most dragons, or drafting as a good fighting resist when stray poison drafts will delete you from this plane of existence. It's also plagued by a very mediocre speed tier, allowing it to get outpaced by said fightings. The Grassy Terrain Sport is nice for teams, but with Rillaboom existing this gen, there's really no reason to spend any of your budget on Tapu Bulu. I'm gonna say it. Hippowdon sand teams suck. Okay, this is a little bit harsh, but Hippo plus Drill in particular is never worth it to me. The main reason is being that the Pokemon that Hippo forces in and loses to are the same mons that wall or stuff Drill. It is so ridiculously hard to get your Hippowdon to force any progress on said checks, or find a position to get your Drill in to do work. With T-Tar and Gigalith, they at least have different typing and more offensive skill sets to facilitate sand more. Hippo is really bulky and reliable defensively, but it sucks more momentum than the other two put together. Hippo plus Dragozolt isn't terrible, as Zolt is checked by different things, and Hippo outside of Sand on Fatter Balance seems as solid, but I have Hippo here solely because of how often it's drafted on Sand alongside Drill. Now I know this is crazy, but we're putting a certified top 10 Pokemon in Draft League on this list. Crazy, but we gotta slot Alolan Ninetales here. Please tell me you guys get that joke and I'm not like a super old Draft League boomer. Veil is definitely a cool option to have for more offensive and setup oriented builds, but at the end of the day, it really is tough having a fairy as frail as Alolan Ninetales. It has decent offensive potential, but really struggles breaking bulky steals. Veil itself is also much worse when you know it can come as well, with Defog, Brick Break, and Psychic Fangs being so widely distributed. The ice typing as a whole is filled with mediocre Pokemon, but Ninetales is the one that's overpriced and overvalued the most, in my opinion. The normal slot has got to go to Chansey. I talked about really disliking passivity, and Chansey is the first mon I think of when it comes to sit there and exist Pokemon. It's incredibly susceptible to Taunt, very obvious telegraphed recovery turns, and of course the move Knockoff. The only reason Blissey didn't get the nod here is because it's a little bit less knock weak. Chansey can for sure be a nuisance in the right hands, as it's disgustingly bulky on the Spadef side, but it's just a bit too exploitable in the builder when you know it's coming. Gen 6 and Gen 7 draft ends aren't going to like this one. Gen 8 Roserade just isn't that good. It lost a ton of offensive potency with the removal of Hidden Power, making it hard stuff by pretty much every steal in the format. It's still a very solid spiker, don't get me wrong. It's just that I don't rate spikes very highly in a generation where boots are so prevalent. Roserade isn't terrible. It just feels like the things it was great at were really watered down this generation. Another Fallen Titan. In Psychic, we have Tapu Lele. The terrain nerf hit this thing hard. Much harder than its Tapu Brethren for sure. It went from instant KOs and 2-hit KOs to really struggling to hit those benchmarks. Scarf sets seem to lack the damage output they really need, while Life Orb and Spec set really lack the ability to outspeed and not be overwhelmed and outgunned by faster mons. This isn't all bad, and Lele can definitely run through some fatter builds. It's just always tough having Lele as your fairy or being forced to draft another to fill the defensive niche that Lele can't. Terrakion takes a spot for most overrated rock type. It's got much of the same problems that I mentioned before with Lele. Scarf seems almost mandatory in most matchups to not be easily revenged or picked off. But without Life Orb or Band, it always misses out on the key OHKOs or 2-hit KOs it needs. It's a decent offensive rocker, but you're always doing so with great risk. I don't know. I would just expect more out of an unresisted stab combination. I'd personally rather go with the frailer but faster Lycanroc Dusk for a cheaper option. Unfortunately, we have yet another Sword of Justice in Cobalion for the most overrated steel. It just really lacks the typing for a defensive steel to thrive. It takes neutral damage from both Psychic and Fairy, which you typically want your steel type to resist. It also has an abysmal speed up stat, which makes those Psychics and Moonblast 2-hit KO or even OHKO in some cases. It's also piss weak from both sides. They can try and make up for it in setup in Swords Dance or Calm Mind, but even then, that often isn't enough. It does do some things well though. For example, it has a great speed tier and phys dev stat, allowing it to function as a solid rocker, Tauntmon, and pivot with Volt Switch. It just comes up short in areas that its steel type really shouldn't on your draft. Last up, we have Water, and probably one of my more controversial picks for this video, Toxapex. Pex is often the mon most people think of when they envision annoying, unbreakable mons, and that's definitely fair. It is ridiculously fat and has access to the best ability in the game in Regenerator. I'm not here to say Pex is bad, just to say it's not as good as people think it is. I believe it's incredibly passive and exploitable by good prep. This can come in the form of sub, taunt, setup, and many others. I know Pex gets ways of punishing these with passive damage via status and haze, but there are often ways around it in almost every matchup. And because Pex has to focus on not being passive, it often has 4 moveslot syndrome, and it just can't fit haze, or toxic, or knockoff, or ice beam, or poison stab, etc, etc. You get what I mean. It's not a bad Pokemon in the slightest. I just feel like it puts a ton of stress on its user in the builder due to its exploitability. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think of my list in the comments below. Let me know your list. And again, 25 likes is what we need to hit. That's our like goal, and we will do the most underrated Pokemon of each typing in Draft League. I'll try and grab some, like, mid-tier mons, some more sleepers, and we'll explain those. Let me know if there's more, like, long-form list videos that you want me to do. More with these typings in particular is great. I'm kind of stumped on ideas after the next one if we do hit the like goal, so please let me know ideas for, blank of each typing. If you guys enjoy these especially. Thank you so much for watching. Drop a sub if you're new. And yeah, that being said, see you guys in the next one. Later.